Okay, so welcome to the deep dive. And today we're going way back to basics,
Okay.
talking self-defense. That instinct to protect ourselves,
Right.
the people we care about.
Right.
You know, it's pretty primal when you think about it. Like
Yeah.
even young animals, you see them play fighting,
Yeah.
but they're really honing skills that could one day, you
Yeah.
know, save their lives.
Absolutely. I mean, it's fascinating to see how that urge to protect yourself
Yeah,
has evolved. From very early on, humans realized they could use tools as weapons.
exactly. And, as humans form societies, we started to see these martial arts traditions popping up everywhere, from ancient Greece to the Far East. Like,
Yeah.
people realize, hey, if we can kind of systematize this, we can give ourselves a real edge in a
Yeah.
confrontation.
Absolutely. And for a long time, martial arts were all about effectiveness in combat.
Right.
Whether you were armed or unarmed, different distances, it was about being able to handle yourself in a real fight.
And then after World War II, things began to change a little bit
Yeah.
because martial arts began to transition into sport.
Yeah.
Judo, karate, jiu-jitsu became popular. And,
Mm.
it was a good thing because it helped preserve these traditions. It emphasized discipline, but the focus on rules and, preventing serious injury
Yeah.
in training sometimes meant that the really practical self-defense aspects
Yeah.
became less prominent.
Yeah. I mean, you can't really train for like a surprise attack from behind
Right.
when you're in a friendly sparring match.
Right, exactly. So it's like it was great that these
Yeah.
arts could kind of thrive in a changing world,
Yeah.
but the real world application sometimes
It did create a bit of
just got a
a
little bit lost.
gap.
Yeah. Which is why I think this book that we're going to talk about today is really interesting. It's called Principles of Self-Defense for Mind, Body, and Spirit by Alessandro Delia. And
Well,
what's really compelling about this book is that it wasn't written, kind of in a traditional martial arts school.
right.
This was written during the coronavirus lockdown.
Oh, wow.
And it kind of grew out of the author's notes for a women's self-defense course. And he actually used someone with no martial arts background at all,
Okay.
his partner's son,
Mm-hmm.
as a kind of a crash test dummy
That's a good way to test it out.
to make sure that the techniques were practical and easy to pick up.
It makes sense. You want to make sure anyone can do it.
So that's what we're going to try to extract from this book today,
Okay.
are those essential principles that you can use in most self-defense situations. Simple ways to get out of trouble, respond to common attacks.
That was good.
Okay, so first let's talk about preparing your body.
Okay.
Because, it seems obvious, but,
Mm.
being physically fit, it's not just about, appearance.
Right.
It's about being able to,
It's functional. Yeah.
do what your brain is telling you to do.
Absolutely.
thing.
Your body needs to be able to back up what you're thinking.
Yeah, and with power.
Right.
Exactly. So, he breaks it down into a couple of key areas. Flexibility,
Okay.
balance, aerobic fitness, and core strength. And he gives you some specific activities you can do for flexibility and balance, yoga Pilates, dance gymnastics, Tai Chi, Kai Chi, all those things that are really going to improve your agility, help you stay on your feet.
I like how he's got some things in there that you wouldn't normally associate with combat,
Right.
last dance and gymnastics, but it's all about that body awareness, isn't it?
Exactly.
And control.
And then for aerobic fitness, which is obviously crucial if you have to sustain
Yeah.
encounter or run away.
That's it. Yeah. You need to be able to keep going.
He's talking sprints, walking, swimming, dancing, Zumba, even taking the stairs. Anything to get your heart rate up.
Yeah, that stamina is key because even a short struggle can tire you out.
Yeah, for sure. And then core strength, which is something people often overlook.
Mm-hmm.
He mentions the gym, but also yoga Pilates dance. Body weight exercises anything to strengthen that core because that's your power center.
That's your anchor. It helps you resist being moved.
Exactly. Provides stability. It's like the foundation for everything.
It is, yeah.
And then this one might surprise some people, but he does talk about the importance of learning to hit
Okay.
and be hit. So, through things like boxercise boxing,
Yeah.
martial arts. And, it's not just about mastering a technique, but it's also about getting used to that physical contact and understanding
The dynamics of it.
the impact.
Because you're probably not used to being hit, are you?
Right.
So you need to get used to that.
It can be crucial for overcoming that fear.
Absolutely, because in a real situation, you don't want to freeze up.
Yeah.
So that familiarity with being struck is really important.
But maybe the most fundamental bodily preparation he talks about is breathing.
Okay. Yeah.
It seems so basic. But when stress hits, it's the first thing we forget about.
Oh, we do. Yeah.
And breathing is how we deliver oxygen
Exactly.
to our muscles and our brain. So that affects our power, our speed,
Yeah.
and our ability to stay calm and think clearly.
Huge. Yeah.
And he recommends things like yoga meditation, qigong tai
Mhm.
chi,
Yeah.
anything where you're learning to control that breath so that it empowers you
Yeah.
rather than becoming
Hmm.
shallow and panicky.
Yeah. They're all about that mind-body connection, aren't they?
Right. Okay. So we've got the physical groundwork. Now let's talk about something that, might not immediately spring to mind
Okay.
when you think about fighting. Body language and posture.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
believe it or not, those nonverbal signals that you're sending out,
Yeah.
they can really influence how a potential attacker perceives you.
That's interesting. So if you're kind of slumped and hesitant, looking vulnerable.
Yeah, you're basically advertising that you're an easy target.
Yeah. Which, unfortunately,
Yeah.
can make you more of a target.
It's an instinct to make yourself small, to try to, disappear.
Yeah.
But he suggests the opposite,
Okay.
that if you can, project confidence through your posture,
Yeah.
stand,
Stand tall.
yeah, in a relaxed but alert way,
Mm-hmm.
that might deter an attacker.
So it's about looking like you're not going to be an easy target.
Exactly. And he actually talks about what he calls the basic stance.
Okay.
So soften your knees,
Mm-hmm.
put one foot slightly ahead of the other, facing the potential threat,
Mm-hmm.
with open palms, and you're kind of shifting your weight a little bit to the front foot so you're ready to move.
Okay.
It's a non-aggressive posture, but it's optimal for both defending yourself
Right.
and if you need to launch a counterattack.
So you're not being confrontational, but you are ready.
Exactly. You're ready. And he says, whatever you do, protect your head.
Okay.
Treat it like an egg in its nest.
Mm-hmm.
Because, losing consciousness in a fight, that's catastrophic.
That's it. Game over. Yeah.
Whereas other parts of your body can,
You can take a few more hits.
yeah, it might hurt, but you're doing.
Yeah.
You're far more likely to survive.
So the head is the priority.
Exactly. And then what's really interesting is he also talks about the power of what you say.
Oh. Yeah,
It's not just about, physical force.
So using your voice. Yeah.
Because often an attacker is relying on your fear.
Mm.
And compliance, they don't expect you to
Right.
challenge them
Yeah.
verbally. And that can really, throw them off their game, give you a moment.
Yeah, they give you a chance to think.
Yeah, exactly. And he suggests, verbally challenging the person,
Okay.
saying something like, what do you want? Maybe they just want your wallet. Maybe you can avoid the whole
Yeah. Sometimes it's just about that.
confrontation. If they keep approaching,
Yeah.
you can give them a firmer warning,
Okay.
back off. And he says, if they keep coming after you've given them a clear warning,
Yeah.
that's an assault.
That's it. Yeah.
Like you've
Made
tried
it clear.
to negotiate
Yeah.
verbally,
Yeah.
and they're not having it. And then he talks about, making as much noise as possible, shouting, talking loudly. Because most attackers are looking for that easy private encounter.
Right. They don't want attention.
Yeah, exactly. And if they think people are going to come,
Yeah.
They're much more likely to flee.
Yeah. Good point.
But remember to keep breathing.
Yeah. Don't forget to breathe.
All right, so we've got our body prepared. We're using our body language and our voice. Now let's talk about the actual movement.
Mm-hmm.
How can we use movement to our advantage,
Okay.
especially if we're up against someone bigger and stronger?
Yeah. Because it's not all about brute force, is it?
No, it's about being smart.
Hmm.
And he talks about how, our fundamental physical structure hasn't changed much
Right.
for,
We're still the same.
thousands of years.
Right.
So the things that worked for people, centuries ago
Hmm.
are still relevant today.
It's all about physics
Exactly.
and biomechanics.
And he talks about using forward and backward movement strategically to keep a safe distance, disrupt the attacker's momentum, create openings for your own responses.
So it's not just about retreating. It's about controlling that space.
Exactly. He also talks about using gravity.
Okay.
So like dropping your weight,
Mm-hmm.
rising up quickly, that can add power to your movements and throw your opponent off balance.
Interesting. So using your weight to your advantage?
Exactly. And then he has this concept of the center line.
Okay.
So imagine a line running straight down the middle of your body, from the top of your head to the ground.
Right down the middle.
That's a primary target for an attacker.
Yeah, I can see why. A lot of vulnerable spots there.
But it's also the line along which most direct attacks are going to come.
Yeah.
So he talks about moving outside the guard of an attack,
Okay.
which means stepping to the side of a punch or a kick, as opposed to going inside the guard, which would be stepping into the path. of like a hook or a roundhouse.
I see. So it's about getting out of the way of the attack
Yeah.
rather than trying to meet it head on?
Yeah, like if someone's trying to reach you with their arm,
Yeah.
you want to move out of the way of that arm, not step into it.
Makes sense.
And then he also talks about how turning and twisting, spiraling movements,
Mm.
can help you deflect energy and destabilize an opponent.
Okay, so using your opponent's momentum against them.
Exactly. And then there's speed and snap,
Speed and snaps.
delivering your techniques quickly before the other person can react.
Yeah, so they don't have time to think.
Right. And then finally, he talks about muscle memory.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
that's the idea that through practicing techniques,
Yeah.
they become automatic.
You don't even have to think about it.
Yeah, they become subconscious reactions. And in a fast-moving attack, you don't have time to think.
Right. You just react.
You just got to react. So, yeah, so you've got your body prepared, you've got a good stance, and you're moving intelligently. But self-defense is also about your mindset, right?
Well, absolutely. Your brain is the control center in all of this.
And, it's helpful to think of your brain as having two parts. The conscious mind
Yes.
and the subconscious mind.
Yeah.
And the subconscious, that's where your instincts come from.
Right.
Those life-saving first reactions.
Yeah.
And the good news is you can actually program effective self-defense techniques into your subconscious
Yeah.
through practice.
So that's where muscle memory comes in.
Exactly. But he also talks about the mental battle,
Okay.
that feeling of fear,
Yeah.
freezing when you're in danger.
It's a natural reaction.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
And he points out that, a physical attack is also about the attacker trying to dominate you.
Yeah, to gain control.
Mentally.
Yeah.
And so if you fall into that victim mentality, that can be really dangerous.
Because then you're letting them win.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So he actually suggests practicing mental self-defense,
Oh, interesting.
in those everyday conflicts.
Yeah.
Where you might face verbal aggression or bullying.
Right.
Because by responding confidently in those situations, you build up this kind of
Yeah, resilience.
mental toughness
Yeah.
that can help you.
So it's like practice for the real thing.
Yeah, exactly. And when it comes to an actual physical attack, it says, you've got to give yourself permission to act, even if it goes against your nature, to not want to hurt someone.
Right, because we're taught not to hurt people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in a self-defense situation, you're the one in the right.
That's it. Yeah.
You are defending yourself. And he says, just like with physical skills, regularly exposing yourself to simulated attacks and training can really help to mentally prepare you.
So it's like desensitizing yourself
Exactly.
to the fear.
And, he mentions how, like, police and military simulations have proven this, that they really do.
Yeah, they make a difference.
Yeah, they improve survival rates. So it's like, you're mentally preparing yourself
Yeah,
for the shock of the real event.
that makes sense.
So basically he's saying, if you feel threatened, trust your gut and act quickly. That might mean running away. It might mean talking your way out of it. It might mean striking first. The key is to do something.
Don't just freeze. Yeah.
And then he goes beyond that immediate reaction. And he talks about strategy,
Okay.
because the attacker usually has the advantage of having a plan.
Right, they've thought about this.
Yeah, so
stuff.
to survive, you need to disrupt that plan and have a strategy of your own.
So you're not doing what they expect. Yeah.
And he talks about the OD loop.
The OD loop, what's that?
It stands for observe, orient, decide, act.
Okay.
So it's a framework for strategic thinking in stressful situations.
Yeah.
Originally developed for the military.
Oh, right.
But he says it can be really useful for self-defense and de-stress. Distance is your ally
Distance.
because it gives you time to observe,
Okay. Yeah.
orient yourself to what's happening, decide what you're going to do, and then act.
So distance buys you time.
Exactly.
Good thing.
And it can also give you time to try and de-escalate the situation through talking.
Yeah. Good point.
And when it comes to actual physical confrontation, he says, often striking first is a better strategy
Oh, okay.
than just trying to defend yourself for a long time.
So taking the initiative.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You don't want to get into this prolonged fight where you're just absorbing damage.
Yeah, I can see that.
But it's a really important question. When do you actually fight?
Yeah, when's the right time to fight back?
He starts by reminding us that, just like most animals, humans naturally avoid fighting.
It's risky. Yeah.
You can get hurt. And he shares this perspective that's often heard from police officers,
Okay.
which is that an assault really begins when someone refuses to let you leave safely.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So it's, ultimately the decision to physically defend yourself.
Yeah.
It's a personal one. But self-defense training is about giving you the skills
Mm-hmm.
to Yeah, potentially de-escalate the situation,
Mm.
but also to recognize the right moment to act.
So you've got more options.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he outlines these specific situations where he says, fighting becomes your only option. So if someone tries to restrain you,
Okay.
they try to move you against your will
Mhm.
to another location,
Mhm.
or if you genuinely believe that your life is in danger
Right.
and you've tried everything else,
Yeah.
he says those are the situations where you got to fight.
Okay, so those are the red lines.
Yeah. And he says, based on what law enforcement statistics show, those first two scenarios,
Yeah.
being tied up or moved, those very often lead to the worst possible outcomes.
So it's really about preventing that from happening.
Yeah. And then,
Yeah.
he talks about, okay, if you are going to fight, how much force can you use?
Right. What's acceptable?
Yeah, he says this analogy
Yeah.
of a baseball bat. If someone's breaking into your home,
Yeah.
you can use a baseball bat to defend yourself.
Yeah.
But you can't chase them down the street
Right.
and keep hitting them. And so it's that idea of reasonable force.
Yeah. So you using enough force to stop the threat, but not going overboard?
Exactly.
Mm.
And he says, fight until you can get away and only continue to incapacitate the attacker if you can't escape.
Hmm.
And as he quotes, it is better to live and be judged by 12 than to be carried at your funeral by 6.
Powerful. Yeah.
So yes, survival is the priority. And then he breaks it down into what he calls fighting zones
Fighting zones. Okay.
based on the distance between you and the attacker. So zone 1 is out of striking range.
Okay.
You're safe. Zone 2 is personal space.
Okay.
They could potentially strike or grab you.
Right.
Zone 3 is they've made physical contact.
So they've grabbed you.
Yeah, grabbed you or holding you.
Yeah.
And zone 4 is on the ground.
On the ground. Okay.
And he says your level of safety decreases as you move from zone 1 to zone 4.
So you want to stay as far away as possible, ideally.
Yeah, so in zone 1, you're using that ODL loop. You're maintaining a safe distance. He suggests at least 4 times their reach,
Okay.
more if they have a weapon. Or your movement's limited. You're being aware of your surroundings. You're trusting your instincts. You've got an escape route in mind.
Always have an escape route. Yeah.
Put your phone away. Avoid distractions.
Good point.
Zone 2 is where things can escalate quickly.
Okay.
So if someone's in your personal space and they don't back off when you ask them to,
Mm-hmm.
that's an assault.
Yeah. They're not respecting your boundary.
And your goal is to either get out of that zone, create more distance, or if you feel like it's your only option, strike first.
Oh, okay.
And he says, the moment they attack you, it becomes the red zone.
Yeah.
But if you are the one initiating the attack to prevent something worse, then it's a green zone.
I see. So you're taking control.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he has some key offensive principles for zone 2.
Okay.
Face the attacker directly. Protect your head. Don't wait and defend.
Attack.
Surprise is key.
Yeah.
Keep moving forward to disrupt their balance. Try to attack from an unexpected angle.
Right.
And he reminds us your body is a weapon.
Zerati is a weapon.
He lists all these different things you can use. Your head,
Your head.
your arms,
Your alarm.
leg. And then he also lists, vulnerable targets on an attacker.
Yeah.
But he's also reminding you that those same areas are vulnerable on your own body.
Right. Yeah. 2 sides to every coin.
Exactly. And he says the goal is to run away to safety
Yeah.
when you can. But if you can't, you need to disable the attacker enough to allow you to escape.
Yeah. You've got to create an opportunity.
Yeah. And he actually gives this practical example of
Yeah.
walking down an alleyway and you see someone suspicious
Right.
and he walks you through, the ODA loop from your initial observations in zone 1 to the potential confrontation in zone 2. And he talks about, the importance of verbal warnings and taking preemptive action if you're attacked.
So it's putting it all into practice.
Exactly.
Wow.
Okay. So then we move into zone 3 grabs.
Okay.
And he stresses that when someone grabs you, you need to act immediately.
Yeah. Because it can escalate.
It does,
Okay.
because a grab often precedes,
You're a more serious attack.
yeah, you don't want to get into a prolonged struggle, especially with someone bigger and stronger.
Right.
So the goal is to deliver a quick, stunning strike
Right.
that's going to let you break free.
So you can get away.
Yeah, exactly. And he gives you some general principles of dealing with a grab.
Okay.
First, deliver that counterstrike as quickly as possible. Second, cover their grabbing hand
Okay.
so they can't strengthen their grip,
Yeah.
or use it for something else. And then simultaneously try to peel their hand away while twisting your body
Okay. So you're creating some space. Yeah.
and try to disrupt their balance and posture.
Right. Yeah.
And then he breaks down grabs into 4 stages
4 stages.
just
Okay.
before they make contact.
Right.
Treat it like they're about to strike you.
Right.
grab you at arm's length,
Yeah.
grab you with a bent arm, and then a fully torqued grab.
Like they've really got you.
So each stage needs a different response.
Exactly. And for a grab with a bent arm, he describes these arm wrap techniques.
Arm wrap.
Outside wrap, inside wrap.
Yeah.
You're basically using your arm in a circular motion to gain control of their arm.
And he even covers what to do if you're backed against a wall.
Oh, right, because that's a tricky one.
Yeah. He gives you specific techniques there. But the idea is, often to use their momentum against them. Create a fulcrum point to break their hold.
So you're not trying to overpower them?
No, you're using their strength again.
I'm using leverage, yeah.
Exactly. And then he has the stage 4 fully torqued grab.
Okay, so they've got a really good grip.
Yeah, they've got you. And he says, immediately deliver a stun strike to a vulnerable area.
Okay.
Pull their opposite elbow towards your center to disrupt their balance. Spin your body and try and take their back.
Okay.
Which is a much better position for you.
Get them off balance.
Exactly.